Hello, I'm Robert, voluntary fact checker and helping you if you're scared of many things. And this is about Zelensky and false claims that scare people. The truth is that Zelensky wants an immediate ceasefire, and he's wanted this for the last year. And Putin makes false claims about Zelensky, which lead people to believe mistakenly that Zelensky wants the war to continue and wants the war to get worse, which doesn't actually make sense. But it's a scary thing for people to believe. So Putin shares that for propaganda reasons. And so people you find on the internet who say this, some of them are pro-Russia, Russian misinformation agents and so on. And some of them are far-right people who, for different reasons, try to promote this idea because they're opposed to Zelensky. And it's not true at all, not true whatsoever. But the people that I help don't believe it for either of those reasons. They just believe them because they find the claims scary. And scary things that just undermine their ability for critical thinking, and so they believe these things, just because they're scary. So, first of all, why is Putin trying to do this? Well, it's quite a common tactic for countries that are at war for the leader of one side to do things to undermine the leader of the other side. So he's got very obvious motivation for trying to undermine Zelensky in any way he can. He has, he's not rubbish at military strategy, but he is an expert in use of words. He's got experience of many years as a propagandist and shaping messages and spy and so on. So he's doing what he's good at, which is using words to shape people's beliefs. And extraordinary what he actually gets people to believe. But try and think, this is what he manages to convince some people of falsely. That Zelensky wants his cities to be bombed. That he wants to be able to walk around in Kiev, not actually certain that a missile might strike him at any moment. That he wants to have power cuts in winter. So he's continually got the power coming off in winter. He wants to have air raid sirens so that he and his population have to go into air raid shelters often every day. And this is not a rational thing for anyone to want. And he does not want these things. So why would Zelensky want these things? He does not. So now let's go and look at how Putin manages to convince people through rather extraordinary methods to actually believe this. So first of all, he has to undermine this claim, the truth, that Zelensky wants peace and wants immediate peace and wants a ceasefire along the current line, which is what he's been asking for the last year. So what Putin says is, look, if Zelensky wanted peace, he would give me Pokrovsk. He would give this city that is a fortified city in Donbass, which Russia has no chance of taking. And he manages to convince people through the power of words alone that if Zelensky wanted peace, that he would hand Pokrovsk over to Putin before a ceasefire. And it's very obvious, if he even had that capability, that Putin would just say thank you very much and keep fighting. There's no guarantee that if he could give Pokrovsk to Putin, and that's just the preliminaries before the start of the ceasefire talks. Why would Putin just not give some excuse and say, look, this isn't working, and keep fighting? But the truth is that Zelensky can't give Ukrainian cities to Putin. Nobody can. And I give the example there of Blackpool, that take away all this about it being a war, all about him being the leader of the invading country. Just imagine that maybe for some commercial reasons or something, that the Republic of Ireland, wanted Blackpool to be part of its territory, and was willing to give the UK government, $1 billion in order for them to let Blackpool be part of Ireland. There's nobody in the UK who could sign this agreement with Ireland. Nobody has the right to give Blackpool to Ireland. And so it would have to be a referendum. The people from Blackpool would have to want to join Ireland, and the and the rest of the UK would have to okay it too, just like the Scottish independence referendum. So it's exactly the same in Ukraine. It's a country governed by the rule of law. Zelensky has only got the powers that he's granted in the Ukrainian constitution. Nobody in Ukraine has the ability to give a Ukrainian city to any other country. He couldn't give Lviv, for instance, to Poland or Romania or to Hungary. He couldn't give any Ukrainian city to anyone. He just doesn't have that right. So that's quite simple to see. It's just not true. Then this series of false claims go through quite quickly. That the claims use that to undermine the truth, which is that Zelensky wants peace. Then there's the false claim that Zelensky is a Nazi. Of course, if Zelensky was a Nazi, then he's not a legitimate person for Putin to talk to. The truth is that Zelensky is a Jew, and 3 of his grandfather's brothers were killed in the Holocaust. And Zelensky speaks Russian as his first language. He's very pro-Russia culture. That was partly why he was elected, because he's because of his Russian roots. But Ukrainian is his second language. He got very widespread support. That leads into the next one, that he is the legitimate leader of Ukraine. The claim that he is not the legitimate. He was elected in a landslide. And in the first round, the opposition party, Russian party, then they won the districts around Donbass and another couple of districts, and a little bit of Kharkiv in another district. And the second round, they all voted for Zelensky, so he won by a landslide. And the party that won some of those districts in the first round, as soon as Putin invaded Ukraine on the day immediately when he invaded Ukraine, the leader of that party said that he was completely opposed to Putin doing that, and he joined the defense of Ukraine. And he urged his members of his party to join Ukraine in defending against Putin. So this idea that somehow Putin's invasion is legitimized by the election in 2019 is completely the opposite. That all the candidates are unified in saying that they're opposed to the invasion. So then the next false claim is that Zelensky is only interested in money and that he earns billions from the war. And the truth is here that Zelensky earned his $20 million fortune, which is not a huge amount. It's about fourth in the ranked fourth in his total wealth if he was in the UK as a comedian. And that's about what you'd expect from a very popular comedian, a similar population but lower GDP for Ukraine, and he was also popular in Russia before he was president as a comedian. So he actually became a president. He actually had to hand back his shares. He had to sell his shares in his own comedic company, which meant that he lost his income as a comedian when he became president. So he had a drop in income when he became president, because the income paid for a president is much less than income paid to a very successful comedian in Ukraine. And he will regain that income when he resigns his presidency. And then while he has been president of Ukraine, and he has some income from other things like his properties and so on, so it's not he's got no income, but he's got a big drop in it as a result of becoming president. And then far from being involved in embezzlement, he was elected to fight corruption. He has fulfilled his election promise, and he filled it to such an extent that the oligarch who funded his campaign turned out to be involved in corruption too. And he was stealing money that was intended for the war. So Zelensky supported the court, and there was a court case. He was prosecuted, he was found guilty, he was put in prison, and this oligarch had all his wealth confiscated and put to fund the war. So far from embezzling wealth, he's fighting embezzlement and he's fighting corruption. And then final false claim is this claim that Russia offered a peace treaty in 2022 and that Boris Johnson ordered Ukraine to refuse it. The truth is that Boris Johnson just said not to trust Putin, which was not a unique thing for a visiting leader to say, not a unique thing for people to tell Zelensky. Everyone was telling him not to trust Putin. And he didn't need to be told it because Putin had promised not to invade Ukraine and then invade from the north, east and south in total war. So he was obviously not someone not to be trusted. So he hardly needed Boris Johnson to tell him that. And the negotiations continued after Boris Johnson's visit and continued for 6 more days. It never got to the point, there wasn't any agreement for him to refuse at the point when Boris Johnson visited him, because it never got to a point where Zelensky felt that Russia was offering them anything that he could consider signing. And then after 6 more days, it finally ended, these treaty discussions, because Russia required Ukraine to give Russia it said that all the people party to the agreement, including Russia, had to agree before Ukraine could receive any support, military support, from its allies if Russia was to break the invasion and invade again. That meant that if Russia was to invade Ukraine and then Ukraine wanted some Stingers or Javelins, anti-tank missiles, he wanted some shells to defend against Russia, then he would have to ask Russia permission to get these supplies in order to fight Russia, which obviously Russia would not give. So with that nonsense clause, then they just said, well, look, Russia isn't sincere, they're not sincerely negotiating for peace, and that's why it ended in 2022. So that's the truth of what actually about behind all these false claims. And so this can help you if you're scared, because it means that Zelensky generally wants peace. That's what he wants. He wants a ceasefire along the current lines. As Trump said, cut it the way it is. That's what Zelensky's been asking for the last year. And all his allies have been asking for that. And Putin is the only one. Actually, many people, there's a majority in Ukraine who want the ceasefire along the current lines, if that's the reason for the ceasefire. And those are the conditions, that it just stops where it is. And there's also a majority in Russia, in the Russian public, that want it, if that is how it ends. And there's a lot of pressure on Putin to accept this from other Russians, because of things like the gasoline shortages, not being able to sell the oil and so on. So it's just a question of how long Putin stands out against this, stands against, and keeps going and says this war must continue, and it's how long he stands out against this pressure from the people within Russia who want him to stop the war. And he can probably stand up to it, this pressure, for quite a long time because of his ability as a dictator and because of his propaganda abilities and so on. But at some point he's likely to give way and say, look, it's time to stop. When he stops, then the war ends. He will then declare victory. He will tell the Ukrainian people, the Russian people, that he's won this war because he is master of propaganda, just like he said he'd won in Syria when he had to withdraw from all of Syria. And he completely lost any Russian access to Syria. He told the Russian people, and they believed it, that Russia has achieved everything they went to Syria to achieve, and that's why they left. Completely made up, but they believe it. So you don't need to worry about what's going to happen to Putin. He'll just tell them that, okay, we've won, and then they'll believe him. So it's just really up to when Putin decides to end the war, and then it'll end. So it's really actually quite optimistic in a way, because it shows us very little. So this is fact-checking to help people who are scared. Everyone else wants peace now along the current line, and it's just up to Putin. So it's a much less scary situation than you think. And Putin's just saying all this rubbish with the aim of just advancing very, very slowly at about twice the speed of a garden snail in the fastest moving front in Donbass. And he's completely stuck along the Dnieper River. The Russian army has never been able to cross the river in the last 3 years of fighting. So it's not a very powerful army. It's very easily stopped just by a river. It's advancing very, very slowly in Donbass. And that was with Ukraine with a tenth of the fighter jets that Russia has, tenth of the military aircraft in all respects. And yet Ukraine is able to keep Russia out of its airspace with technology which for the rest of NATO, even the F-16 fighter jets, 1980s technology, I think it is, and that's what they're using to keep out Putin. So, and before then, we used the MiG-29s, which is 1970s technology, Russian technology, and that was sufficient to keep out Russia in the first year, couple of years or so. So Russia is not very strong. It's very weak. It's very slow, and it just really when Putin decides to stop, then the war is over. And then it'll go into history books as just one more war, like the Gulf War, like the Iraq War, like many wars we've had in the past, and that'll be it over. So hopefully this helps you if you're scared by these false claims about Zelensky.